Hello, welcome to my channel. I'm Chris Godber and this is my channel, Chris Godber Art, where I discuss art, culture, film, books, etc. Today I wanted to review shortly a book actually found randomly, which is always the best time I think to find a book, and that is Andrew Marr and a short history of painting. A short book about his painting, which is a book I quite randomly came across in the library, also being unaware that Andrew Marr, who's a quite well-known presenter, mostly political programmes on the BBC in the UK, was actually a painter. And my expectations for this book were, to be honest, I'm going to be completely honest, at first I had a sort of snobby reaction to it. I thought, there's loads of well-known figures, actors and stuff, who go on about painting, but on some levels it can often come across as quite superficial. Not all the time, obviously. Some of them do have a genuine interest and knowledge. But I sort of rolled my eyes when I first saw this. I thought, what, Andrew Marr? I mean, he's actually fairly good balanced presenter. He always gives political figures a fairly good grilling, and he's probably, I'd describe him, my perception of him is as a centrist dad, enlightened centrist dad in some respects. Like he is, that's the persona I've always thought of him when I've been watching him on various news programs or political programs. He seems like fairly well balanced, a bit more conservative potentially, but sort of more like centrist, I suppose. But beyond all that, this is not really a video about that. It's not really a video about that side of his career. I'm just putting it in context because that's how I know of Andrew Marr. But no, this is actually actually well written. I was actually very surprised at this book. I didn't know what to expect, and it covers quite a broad range of subjects actually within the realms of painting. And I was actually very surprised by how well written, accessible and articulate Andrew Marr manages to be in this book. So I'll read the synopsis quickly. In a short hit book about painting, writer and broadcaster Andrew Marr tackles the subjects of inspiration, creativity, politics, beauty and form. How does the artist make good work? What constitutes good? How important is technique and the imagination? And this is also something I was aware of but didn't realise. Following a serious stroke in 2013 that left him partially paralysed, Marr struggled with his physical rigours of painting using oils. This led to his wrestling with some of the very fundamental questions about painting as an art form in itself, and to interrogate himself daily about brushstrokes, colour balance, line and texture. Using his own work and progress as examples of failures and examples of techniques from classical artists right up to the present day, Marr examines how the painter can improve and learn from his or her mistakes. Marr's provocative, political and instructive book is not just an essential resource for all amateur painters, it is a must-read for anyone fascinated by the creative process and the limits of human artistic achievement. So this caught my attention, and to be honest, I was actually very surprised at the quality of Andrew Marr's work. He is clearly somebody who, I'll put a few examples up here, who does know his stuff when it comes to whether it be colour theory, whether it be to the history of modernism in painting. He is someone who actually does really know his stuff. Now I actually think this is like part of the reason for my cynicism when I first saw this was I thought, okay, just another famous person going on about, their painting hobby, and like Sylvester Stallone paints, Johnny Depp paints, Anthony Hopkins paints, but I think he's also quite knowledgeable, to be fair to him. And a few other like even George Bush, of all people, former American president, is a self-professed painter, and he's going on about how he's found all his meaning after his retirement from painting and everything. But this is actually this came up as much more knowledgeable, much more sophisticated in a lot of ways than I actually expected it to be. So it's basically split into a few different parts. Obviously there's an introduction where he talks about his own background with painting, He talks about how he looks at painting, different materiality of paint. He also does go into the art market a bit and just some of his thoughts on that. And it's actually very well written. It's written in quite an accessible style. He does go into the history of painting a bit, like, from the more classical to the more modern and the contemporary. And I was actually surprised at the broad range of knowledge that he demonstrated in the book. Like, for example, he mentions artists that you would, the people at the cutting edge of painting do talk about a lot, such as Robert Rauschenberg and Gillian Ayres, for example, a British modernist painter. But the way he weaves it all together is actually quite inspiring. And there's one particular part where he starts talking about, because he had this stroke. So the genesis of this book, from what I believe, is that he's always painted. Like, he's always been a painter. I'll show one of his early landscape paintings that he talks about, called Happy Day, which is a good but conventional sort of landscape painting. And he starts the book off really by talking about how after he had this stroke, he realised that he's got limited time on this earth, basically, and that he loves painting. He's always had a very, genuine and authentic interest in art and painting, and how he realised that, so I'll cover this extract. I'll find it. So he sort of talks about how he'd been a sort of Sunday painter for a long time. He enjoyed doing it. But he was painting in a fairly conventional style, sort of copying styles, which is how all painters start off anyway, to be honest. But how that stroke made him realise that he only has limited time and he's got to really crack on with it. So yeah, I mean, the book, I'm not going to try and make this too laborious and long. He covers, like, more radical sort of contemporary artists like Basquiat, who's sadly dead now, but then he also talks about the art market, what effect that has on painters' work. He talks a lot about style in painting, but he goes quite in depth into composition. He does have a whole chapter where he talks about colour and composition, and he actually shows some works in how he was relating to the images whilst he was making them. He talks quite in depth about motifs in abstract painting and about colour relationships. So this is actually surprisingly good advanced stuff, to be fair. It did actually go past my expectations. He also has a chapter called Taste, where he's talking about people's taste in art. Like, he talks about fashion, he talks about a lot of very quite complex subjects, actually. There's also a very good part towards the end where he talks about the relationship of technology to painting too, and just art, and it's quite an impassioned argument in that part where he argues for the materiality of paint, and he goes into Kurt Schwitters, for example, who was a very well-known artist associated with Dadaism, but almost a force in his own right, and Kiefer, and a lot of painters who are really serious about their practice will instantly recognise, but might not be so excited. It's not like a book where he says something like, "Oh, I love Van Gogh and Picasso." Like, artists that everybody with even a surface level appreciation of art is knowledgeable about. It's very well written. I breezed through this. It's about 140 pages roughly, 142. It's full of these full colour reproductions of his work and other well-known works of a vast array, everything from Monet to Matisse to Basquiat to Sarah Lucas and Schwitters, Rauschenberg, etc. I would highly recommend this book, actually. I thought it was very interesting. and it does weave together a lot of different subjects within the painting world, such as the formal concerns of composition, colour, how all those relate, but also talks about the art market. He also talks about the art market. He talks about I thought that particularly at the part at the end where he just said it's called immortality at the end of the book, and he's just saying, look, I just do this because I love doing it. I know that maybe I'm not going to ever be holding the same esteem as Picasso or something, but I enjoy the process of it. It's a book that's primarily about the creative process and the importance of that when you're painting, and it also demonstrated very well by the chapters where he literally goes into step by step a process of producing a composition or a finished painting, and he describes in a very accessible but also quite in-depth way of how the back and forth that goes on, the push and pull that goes on when you're actually painting a picture, and there's like process. So it's quite an interesting exploration of process in painting, really, and it surpassed my expectations, I'll be honest. It's pretty easy to read, like I said. I'd recommend it quite highly. I think you get a lot out of it. Whether or not you agree or disagree with Andrew Marr is, to be honest, as a presenter, he's pretty solid. Like I said, he's not exactly like a left-wing radical or anything, but he's pretty good presenter, I'd say. He's always been very balanced, I think, and this gives another aspect of his life which I wasn't aware of. And in general, you can just tell that he's a person who genuinely appreciates art, who's passionate about the subject, and actually does know a fair amount. So I recommend this book for anybody who's interested in painting, modern art, contemporary art. It's you can pick it up for £15. The publisher is Quadrille. I'd recommend it. This is a good find. I just borrowed this from the library, so it's not my actual copy, but yeah, I actually recommend this quite highly, to be honest. It's an interesting book, and you will probably learn a few new things if you want to learn about creative process, theory and painting and stuff in art history. So yeah, I'd recommend it. That's probably going to leave it there because I don't think there's much more I can add. Like I said, in terms of how it's read as well, very accessible, easy, quite written quite authentically as well. I felt like a sort of conversation between him and myself and the readers and his readers in general. It also does go into some of the more technical things like pigments and paint, how they're produced, and yeah, it's just a very interesting book. And like I said, it also goes into technology, digital art, and it's very much an argument for painting, which I like. Anyway, decent book, pick it up if you can.